Hello, my name is Dr. Jackalyn Rainosek, and I am very pleased to have Nigel Lakey with me today because we're going to try to present to you some discussion about national security. And we come from somewhat different perspectives, but I think we have a lot of things that we can find common ground. Um, so this is Hot Topic, Bold Talk. And I'm going to start this national security discussion off because I think Nigel has one of the best definitions for national security I've seen. So give it forth, Nigel, please.
All right, Jacqueline. Well, here we are again. So let's start with the definition. Now, my perspective is that of conservatism, if you will, right? And I often refer to my anchor in that being back in the Reagan and Thatcher days. And that's not to put a label on anything, but it's more to talk about can I say roots of conservatism from my perspective
Mhm.
without the manufactured outrage we get courtesy of the press and all the hyperbole. So when we talked about doing this, I thought the first thing we need to do is be able to define it. And I would say people have got a perspective that I may not share and you may not share. And frankly, it's a little bit narrow, but you can't make national security about everything because
Right.
you lose all the context of it, right? So I thought I'm going to try and do this in a paragraph that's pretty straightforward. And I quote, this is can I say at a fundamental level, what is national security? It's the
Okay.
preservation of a sovereign people's capacity to govern themselves, the ability of its empowered state to defend its citizens, enforce its laws, protect its economic vitality against foreign or domestic coercion. Now, that touches on a lot of things because there's hardly a military element to that, right? We're talking more of
Right.
how do we protect the fabric of our society? And I think the thing that we need to get our heads around is when you start expanding that, what does economic vitality mean to you or me? What does defend its citizens, et cetera?
Right.
And I
Right.
think that there's a set of points that we can work through that start to address some of those. And as always, our intention here is to stay away from the headlines and not drop the
Right.
names and things, and think more about how intelligent people can help frame up a conversation and walk away enlightened. Not so much again to change anybody's mind, but if we can just have a conversation about these things instead of yelling at each other, well, we'll probably walk away happier and we'll hold on to some friendships too. So that's how
Well,
I'm
and
going to
I think,
start.
yeah, and that's one of the things. I start from the basis that you've been a dear friend of mine and someone I value. I appreciate your ideas. And I want to hear them because it expands my own knowledge base of whatever topic we're talking about. Now, I'm more liberal than you are. So let me just say what my definition would be in national security. But the truth of it is, if you heard them, the two of them together, if you examine them, they really basically say some of the same things. So mine is national security should protect our ability to govern ourselves. You've already mentioned it. Protect our constitutional system. One of the things that's really important to you is I believe in the Constitution, the United States, and the rule of law. So that's very important to me, and I think it's a part of national security. I think it's to defend our citizens. Your definition has that. I think it's also to preserve the economic foundation of our country so that we can maintain ourselves as a free society, to be prosperous and whatever. So I don't see any major differences between us. I value what you say. I could take your definition and go and talk with my friends and say, I think this is an excellent definition. Why don't we start here? I wouldn't have any problem with it. I think one of the questions that is challenging, and I'm going to ask you to answer it first, because I think it's hard to answer, but I know you'll have a good answer. What actually threatens the American people's capacity to be self government?
I think there's a really long list there. Now, there's existential threats that are out there right now that we can identify and we can target and we can respond to, and that's going to be things like cybersecurity, right? How do we protect our national infrastructure? I'm going to say that's water treatment plants, power generation,
Right,
from either it could be a domestic threat, but certainly we're seeing these materialize in real time, right? There are actors overseas who want to hack into our infrastructure and I'm going to say damage our way of life, our economy, etc. So there's the obvious existential threats that we see. I'm going to say also, political interference, and we live in this connected world where frankly, an online existence, I'm not sure who we're dealing with at times. And we need to be
yeah,
very careful, not so much be guarded in what we say, but I think we have to be cautious about who we say it to. And also,
right,
once again, be careful be wary of the source and understand. So there's, I think, less of an existential threat, but also one that we've identified. We've talked all about the disinformation campaigns and the interference, et cetera, et cetera.
right,
I think those are genuine threats. I think you've got a threat on the global stage of people losing confidence in the US dollar as a reserve currency. We benefit
right,
greatly from that, of course, because the bulk of international commerce is settled in US dollars. We have a banking
right.
system that's secure and that helps to make that trade in US dollars something that people can believe in, right? I think too, when we start to expand on the definition of protect our economic vitality, our intellectual property, our ability to do things, whether it's, to pull out of the headlines, be the masters of AI, whatever, but there's a lot underlying that. It's the hardware and the software associated with that intellectual property, right?
Right,
Our
right,
ability to sustain a manufacturing base, and I don't want to say so much be self-sufficient, but I think if the country becomes overly dependent on outsourcing, and we've seen that happen, right? Our manufacturing base has
right.
been degraded over the number of years. If we lose that ability, we start to look like a lot of other countries that at one point were powerhouses in industry. So our national security, I mean, it's this big thing, right? But it's much more than it was back in the Cold War days. And again, when I make my reference of the Reagan Thatcher era, that's really Cold War. So it's way more than military dominance. It's way more than spy versus spy. And I don't know if you spend a lot of time on what are the threats, I don't know that we'd see much difference, right? And I'll turn it over to you, but my closing comment would be we probably have as much inside in the wire threats as we have external threats. And
Right.
it's everything from, the corruption of our systems, et cetera, the willful ignorance associated with misinformation. I I think that's one of the reasons why you and I are having these conversations, right? To look behind those, if you will, see if you can find the people caught in the lies and the misinformation, et cetera, and then start to really uncover what we believe.
Well, and I think you're right on. And where I would probably start, and I can certainly can support some of the things you've said, but here, what I would start is I think the threat to American society's ability to self-govern is we have a number of resources on the internet that, as you said, I have no idea who wrote them. I can tell maybe by what they've written which side they're on in this very diverse society, this divisive society we live in right now. But I think one of the things that really concerns me, because I was an educator for many years, I still am an educator. I think there are a lot of people that are not being educated in what self-government really needs and what we have to do as citizens of the United States. We used to have civic courses. I mean, I don't know about you, but I took them. And I had to know about the Constitution. I had to know about the amendments. I had to know We talked about the rule of law. We talked about all the things that are required in elections and how we do elections and things to make them safe. We didn't have some of the divisiveness we have now. And I think education for me is a major part of what I consider to be important to national security. If our citizens are not educated and they don't have multiple resources they're looking at, then they're going to buy into one of what I consider to be the distorted presentations that are then going to affect how they vote. They're going to affect how they think about America. You gave me an article about how we've gotten to the place that nobody trusts the government of the United States, and people question because they have so many resources coming at them, they have no idea. So to me, national security is affected by everything you described, but it's also by the fact that we cannot have a democracy without being educated about what we stand for. And some people would see a liberal who's a constitutionalist who really believes in the Constitution of the United States would think, what is she talking about? But it's important to me. I think the founding fathers provided some data. I'll admit, I don't always support at all what the Supreme Court's doing right now. I've spent years reading Supreme Court cases and things like that. But to answer that question, I would say, for me, if I put it in one word, we cannot govern ourselves if we're not educated about all the aspects of what national security covers. And that's the reason I think you and I are trying to talk about it. So I'd love to hear some comments further about what I've just said. If
Yeah,
you want to add things.
absolutely. I mean, I think at a broad level, we agree on the fundamentals of national security, but we are going to get into, some of the subtleties. I'll take your point absolutely, and I think we've said it before, right? Our education system in the Western world, this is not a U.S. problem solely, but our education system in the Western world has, it's disappointing at best, and it's a little bit frightening at its worst. And we've I don't know what we're relying on anymore, right? The family system seems to have broken down. We're not talking about our with our parents and our grandparents, etc. This is what it feels to me, right? And I do know for a fact we're not teaching people critical thinking skills. We
Right.
see this all the time, right? So, you eliminate SAT at a college, and you have a whole generation of people who are fundamentally uninformed, not just misinformed, but uninformed and incapable of doing things like simple sums. And I don't know how that came about, right? As an effort to just level everything, get down to some low common denominator. But I do think if we are unable to read and write and converse and have a conversation around what the Constitution means and what is the rule of law, can we start to define some of those things? And I suspect if we have those conversations, you and I will find places where we don't really agree. But we'd have to say that you can't have a society that's illiterate. You can't have a society without laws of some kind. We can talk about some interpretation of those, but I don't know how society can endure uh, being, I'm going to say ignorant, being dumb. And that's not an
Right.
IQ issue, right? That's just being uninformed and incapable. And we do have these information sources, and it frustrates me immensely because you can't trust almost anything. And you go back to trust and verify. But if you don't know how to look, if you don't know where to look, if you don't know how to balance, to have a conversation, well, then you're just prone to all the outrage. So I have
Well,
to
but I
agree.
think, yeah, well, wait a minute, Nigel. I think that the reality is there are a lot of people that don't even care anymore. They're going to ask their friend who they're supposed to vote for, and they probably haven't even looked at what the person stands for. And then we have millionaires spending lots of money putting out lies about various groups to impact people in certain communities. So we have lots of things going on internally. Then we worry about what Russia has done in some of the propaganda that's put out. So if I am uninterested in really knowing about politics because I'm so turned off by it, I'm not even going to take the time to read or do all the things that you and I do. I don't know how many, I have multiplicity of resources I read every day. I mean, I scan them because I'm looking for them for my podcasts and for discussions with you or Richard or, whatever they're about. But I think that's what really concerns me. Now, I think something. I do think that one of the things I read in the Reagan Thatcher principles was peace through strength. So what I have seen in some of the Democratic presidents I've looked at, like Johnson, Obama, and Biden, I'm not taking a position, but it's so interesting to me how they can easily be fit into Reagan's concepts. They may have expanded on it, but they really believe in that. And I think that one of the things I truly believe is in the current situation, we have lost the ability to do diplomacy or to negotiate and bring peace rather than having to do it through military force and enforcing people to do something. So to me, Reagan Thatcher's principle of peace through strength is extremely important. And I think it's something that any of us could agree. Um, I think there have been efforts in the past to de-emphasize military action in order to be, and it doesn't mean that we wouldn't do it if we were at war or threatened severely or whatever else, like 9/11. I mean, we're going to take action as a country and support that. But I think there's a real strength in being able to think from a peaceful perspective in order to gain strength in the world or in our country as a whole. So I'll stop there. Your turn.
You know, I think peace through strength, this concept of deterrence, um, it covers more than military spectrum, right? You could say if we have the strength in our banking system, in our communications, IP, et cetera, as we talked, right? Then that gives us strength. That gives us the ability. Look, I'll say this, right? I think there ought to be a most powerful nation on the face of the earth, and why not us? Why not the United States? So I have no shame in saying that. I will say that I don't support wars just for the sake of wars, but I also look at the situation and some of the circumstances we've got right now, and I wonder what could we have done earlier to prevent us getting to this point? And maybe that's the
Right.
bigger fault, right? And I do think over the last 40 some years, we see many more politicians than we see, I don't know, leaders, right? It's this race, it feels to me to be the most controversial, to connect with the most uninformed or poorly informed or irrational people. And I get your point about some people just don't care, right? We're washed out. But then who votes and who gets elected and what policies do they bring? And I think some of our processes they're just broken there. Now,
Right.
can we get back to more fundamentals of, and maybe that's through an educated population? I don't really know, right? I got to look a little more at the psychology and the anthropology behind some of this, but the peace through strength deterrence, I think it's a good idea. I believe that we shouldn't be weak. I believe also that our allies should be just as strong. And if we find that our allies are not as strong, then maybe we have to go on our own. And I think that's one of the things that we're seeing manifested here, right? With the almost erosion of Western society. And I carry two other passports, as I've also said, right? And I watch Canada and the UK. Um, they used to be extremely powerful partners of the US. They no longer are. And we, whatever the reasons are, right? Globalism, et cetera, et cetera. But so I think the US has got to stand on its own. And I feel that over the last while has just been weakened. Now, there's phrases and all that sort of thing, and we start to see the extremists on both sides of it, those in favor of it, those who don't like it. And that's a problem. That's that's erosive to our peace. That's erosive to our quality of life. It's really not helping us very much. So peace through strength, I do believe it's got to start encompassing a lot of things and education among them, all that sort of thing. I wonder if there's a kind of a baseline of interpretation of the Constitution that maybe provides a little more guidance. I don't know, right? There's the Federalist Papers that give a more expanded view of the founders and where some of these constitutional terms came from. It might be useful, but I do wish people would just better understand how our society came to be, and that would be helpful, yeah.
Right. And let me say something. I'm sad that in my bedroom I have a wonderful book that is written by an outstanding lawyer. And she takes the Constitution of the United States, she takes you through every aspect of the Constitution of the United States, provides various different approaches to what's being said in the Constitution. And I think is reasonable and avoids partisanship and things like that. And I'm enjoying the book because I am literally going back. She has the whole Constitution in the book and then various statements and interpretations and looking at it. So, what I'll do, Nigel, is I'm going to put that as a reference because I always give references for my podcast. So, that's one of them I'll give. And I certainly want you to give me some for the Reagan Thatcher because I think it's really important to include in there. Here's the thing that I know that's important to me. I think our strength is with our allies. I'm going to say that I view England and Europe in maybe a slightly different way from you. I think they're powerful allies, and we had them for many, many years. Their strength, I think they're stronger now than ever. I don't think we as the United States have to be independent of those kind of alliances. One of my things that I see that's extremely important is building alliances all over the world. And through those alliances, we bring really a strength that fortifies us against some of the countries that we would consider to be less accepting of a democracy. Um, I I believe that you and I on this call are trying to show people they can build an alliance with someone that has a different point of view. And we can do that. And by building alliances, then we build better educated people and we build better communities because we can work out our issues and set aside maybe our political position parties and sit down and say, what do we really need? And that's what I think you and I are trying to do is to say, let's try to do something like that. I am a big believer of not being isolated. I do not support the U.S. having to withdraw and go inside of itself. I think that our we have Canada is one of our greatest allies we've had in the past. I think there are European countries that have been very powerful and have supported us. And I think that they are getting stronger every day because they're making decisions that they think is best for them. And so it's causing a questioning of things that are happening in the United States. I think that's helpful. Um, I One of the biggest concerns I have about national security is I think we are not united in our own country. And that's what you and I are trying to do is say, there are a lot of us that are not at the extremes. Why don't we come together and discuss these issues and decide what is best? What can we do? So that's what I would add to what you've already said.
I agree with you. We got this divisiveness that's just it's pervasive, right? You can't read a newspaper, you can't go online, you can't do the things that we just accept as normal course of business without being inundated with shock. And there's so many things that frustrate us jointly, right? An uneducated populace, the shock journalism. I don't care where it comes from, right? We just see it everywhere.
Yeah.
My comment on allies, I think I need to tighten that up a little bit, right? I don't know that a nation can survive on its own in isolation without allies and widely dispersed allies.
Right.
There's no evidence in history that says a nation can be isolated, completely internalized, and thrive. You can pick current examples, North Korea, Cuba, whatever, and failed states throughout the annals of history where they've tried that. An interesting thing, if you look back at the Roman Empire, if you look back at Genghis Khan, right? He woke up one day and decided to ride across the desert and conquer half the free world, Alexander the Great. Now, those are more military campaigns, but they're equally cultural. They were reaching out and finding sources of supply.
Right.
I'm not holding them up as shining lights of democratic rule by any measure, but there's allies. And I think you have to, as a successful nation, go out and find people who share a common interest. And that my comment around allies is I think that our common interests have been separated. Now, often those are political, sometimes they're just the winds of society. But man, they're almost invariably the consequence of lowercase p politics, right? This party, that party, who's ever in, we don't agree. We've got this, what we believe to be this mandate from our voters. And I don't know that those are good except for the politicians, and I'll say this, not definitely related, but man, one of the first things I do is get term limits in everywhere. There's no way that anybody can be in elected
I will
office for
support
40
that. I
years.
will support that. Yes,
That's where the corruption and the divisiveness starts to come from. So allies, we need them as a country. We absolutely have them. Our projection of force, our projection of power and influence comes from our ability to have these other places that can represent our interests, right? But I will comment, and my closing comment on this would be, I don't know that they represent our interests or our best interest at times, and uh, that's a theoretical question that's not necessarily proven. But that lack of certainty certainly gives rise to aspects of the divisiveness, right? And the extremism we're just seeing from one end of the spectrum to the other.
well, and I think one of the things that I've always believed, no business in the world can function unless they're a high performing, a well educated, and a environment of work that respects each human being and makes an effort to find out what their talents are and to utilize those talents. So to me, large businesses I've worked in oil and gas and you name it, I've always spent my time talking about everyone having a voice, everyone getting the same training so that we can all be that. I don't care whether it's an administrative associate or whether it's a VP of the organization. Because when we all are educated and we all understand how we can communicate and how we're valuable, then we have a different environment. We don't have as much fighting and we have more of a respectful world to be in. And it's not respectful right now. Now, one of the other things I didn't say, and I'm going to put it out there anyway, because we agreed that we would bring out topics. One of my biggest problems is I really believe in public education. I believe in it. It needs to be financially supported. And I live in a community where they stand up for public education. Because the truth of it is, some major organizations in the community where I live did not support vouchers because they didn't want to take away the money from the public education. They wanted to continue to improve it. Because I do believe in one thing. As an American, I believe every human being in this country has the right to an education and to be able to look at and someday dream for what they want. So I know I don't know. I do believe education is a part of national security. So that's the reason I'm going there. But I do believe that people, when they know and understand what's going on, then they can make better decisions. Now, I think there's a lot of evidence about the corruptions that's going on, about the lack of the actions by the House and the Senate. I think people are being educated, and I do believe that the book that this lawyer did was a way to say, let me tell you what are the three branches of the government. Let me tell you how they are supposed to function. And let me tell you what is valuable about having those three branches of the government. So, I guess the way that I would talk about this point and end it is I have to look at, and I'm going to name mine and then I'm going to ask you to do the same. I have to look at what really constitutes strength in our society. Now, I'm going to start. I believe it's military strength, economic strength, but we have a problem with our economy. People are struggling at this point. I think it's technological leadership. I think it is scientifically based healthcare and health systems. I think that these things in education, other things, help us be a resilient um, and have a resilient infrastructure and have a secure energy process and that fuels all the things we do. When I think about energy, I'm not just talking about oil and gas. I'm talking about the energy we have as human beings to contribute to our society. I do believe in strong alliances, and I appreciate your expansion of because I support what you're saying. I do believe in healthy democratic institutions. And for a long time, even though people disagreed with each other, we did have public confidence that the three branches of the government would function and sustain our republic. So I'll stop there and I'll say, talk to me about what you think is really the strengths that we can build on, because there are a lot of things that are not working real well.
No, there are a lot of things that aren't working well. So look, I mean, I think we're aligned on those elements of national security as you just spoke of. Uh, I'm going to stress that we have failed in an education system, and that's been going on for a long time. We have an educational system today that does not equip people to have a conversation, does not equip people to work in our environment, to contribute economically, et cetera. And I think you could spend a lot of time talking about who and what and where and when. But the fact is, this is not something that's been immediate. This has been ongoing. So if we want to treat people equally and ethically, I think society's got to step up. People have got to take responsibility. They have to develop that self-awareness. We're not doing a good job at all of building a society. And I don't think the answer to that is, socialism. It's not just trying to beat equality of outcomes. that won't happen, can't happen. Just I don't think nature permits that. But can we do a better job in commerce? Can we do a better job in industry? I mean, my answer to that is yes. I'm not saying you got to outlaw billionaires or tax them because they create a lot of wealth and a lot of opportunity. And the answer to some of those questions when we talk about technology, and I'm not talking about Facebook, I'm talking about the ability to invent and create and dominate space, find better ways to power and fuel our economy.
Right.
I spend a lot of time in oil and gas. I support it, and to just suddenly say, well, we don't need it, I think that will take us into the dark ages. Can we
Right.
be dependent on a single source of power or fuel? No.
No,
But
we
if we
cannot.
don't have the technology, we don't have the education, we don't have the people who invent, we don't have the cash to support these things, then we're not going to be successful there, right? So, is it kind of an issue of, well, who contributes, who drives this, right? I think public schools, and I grew up in a place where that's what we had, public schools, right?
Right.
And it came out of your property taxes, et cetera, et cetera. And we had, or I benefited from what I would say is a very classical education. We talked about social sciences, we talked about history, um, we we went to gym classes and that sort of thing. And I felt that I benefited from that, right? When I look at my nieces and nephews and great nieces and great nephews now, I think that they're missing that development. And they're
Hmm.
certainly not coming out of there equipped to have a conversation, a difficult conversation. So expectations are out of line with reality. Can we do something in the educational system to bring that back? That feels like it's a generational issue, not something that's going to happen as a consequence of any election next. But somewhere, and maybe it's just in society, a few people have got to have these conversations and make folks aware that what we have is just not acceptable. I don't care once again whose side you're on, but we can't do this. We can't do this to ourselves. We can't do this to our country. We can't do this to this fantastic social experiment that is the United States. Um, I think I would say having a better understanding of what the Constitution means. I, I didn't grow up in the US, so I didn't take those Constitution classes in elementary school, right? But I did take those classes on social studies and politics, et cetera. And we read of the Constitution. We read of the Magna Carta and a handful of
Right.
things that empowered a population, right? Or that established a dynasty, a legacy, whatever, for good or bad. If we don't understand those things, where they came from, I don't have a lot of confidence in our being successful. So maybe one of the things is to say, we agree on national security. We've got to get some people aligned on what education means.
Right.
If
And
we don't have that, then national security will become something different. It'll become more
right.
survival, which I don't believe to be correct.
Well, and I don't. And I noticed something. I have developed a new program that I'm doing. I've done it in three organizations, and it addresses the ways to look at your own behavior of the 10 groups that there are 10 groups of behaviors that I've identified that truly destroy people from being successful. And those 10 groups, when I teach them in these three organizations, every one of the CEOs said, we are never going to be the same. People are coming to me and saying, I never had any idea that I gave so many excuses and justifications. It's part of the 24 blocking techniques I talk about. And I people would come up to me and say, thank you so much for telling me about how I am resisting change. I don't think we have talked enough about how people resist change. You know, we get to political positions that are extreme because we're so afraid that maybe Nigel's right and I'm wrong. How in the world did we get to a place where you're right and I'm wrong? That's what we're trying to do here is to talk about things so that we can see perspectives. And they'll probably say about us as we continue down this road, God, they agree with so much. it's because if I take the things that matter to me in being an American citizen, I have out in my yard, stand up for democracy, vote in 2026. I didn't tell anybody how to vote. I just said, stand up for our democracy. Go vote in 2026. There are millions of people that sat out in that last election. That's not what I consider to be a citizen of the United States. Now, I want to go on because I want us to talk about, I think, and I'm kind of on our third point, Nigel. So I think, you said a stagnant economy cannot fund a superior military or endure global supply shock. That's what's happening to us. So, what I want you to do is describe what all you mean by that. I have some of my own thoughts, but I want to hear yours.
Sure. And like I think this is more of a classic definition of economy. If we have deflation, if our purchasing power is eroded, if we have significant inflation, stagflation, all of these things are significantly disruptive, right? Our government can't invest, uh, our military can't properly spend,
Right.
industry can't spend. And I think any one of those things starts to lead to just stagnation in the economy, right? We need investment, we need talent. The country needs, well, I'm going to say, income, revenue, if you will, but innovation, investment, these sorts of things. And
Right.
I would say if we have the innovation, we have the investment, we have an economy that's growing at a reasonable pace, right? It's not on fire, but that's a place where people want to invest because it presents opportunity. And if we don't get the investment, if we have an economy that is burdened by regulation, if we have an economy that's burdened by lack of resources, any number of things, then I believe it slows down. It becomes deindustrialized. People simply stop having confidence in its currency. And now we've got a stagnant or a slowing or a significantly eroding economy. If we can't support ourselves, find a way through, if we suddenly lose access to rare earth minerals, this sort of thing, then our expansion, our growth, our attractiveness as a place to invest, it also diminishes. So the supply chain shock, we've got to have a strong economy, we've got to have the innovation, you got to have the resources. We have to have the ability to go someplace else to get what we need.
Right.
I think we also have to have that fundamental ability that says people want to invest because it's a good place to put money to work because I generate a return. There's a societal benefit to it as well. Um, I would say I think business has to be in business not only just to generate wealth for individuals, but I'd like to see society benefit from it as well. Pick a business that does something that makes our lives better. I don't think we're doing much. Well, we're doing some of that, but there's some cases where business has destroyed our quality of life. And tech, right? I use that term techopoly. What we see as tech, I'm not sure that that's particularly good for all of us. It's impacted our education. It's impacted our ability to communicate. It's become a replacement for social interaction in many cases, right? So give us a strong economy, and I think that that goes a long way to being able to defend our society. There's a military issue there as well as somebody shows up with economic warfare. We can preserve our intellectual property, the things that make us good, make us strong. We can also, I think, lead the world in good social development. So I think we've lost track in some cases, right, as to why we exist. And that's from a business perspective, not as a country or society. So give me a strong economy. It creates value, it creates wealth, it creates opportunity. And if we don't have any of those, then I think it's very difficult to defend the nation and defend the Constitution and have people who self-govern. And one element, the fundamental element of the Constitution is we elect people to do the things that we can't. But as individuals, as citizens, right, we try to govern ourselves, but I think in some cases we've abandoned that. We've almost willingly handed it off to somebody else. Get that back, and that's can I say our social conscience?
Right.
We need to reawaken that.
Well, and I think that's what I work on every day. And the reason I developed this program I did, because what I saw was a true lack of understanding of how somebody could manage themselves. How could they self-govern themselves? So that's the reason I created this program. Because I can tell you something, once you go through it, you're going to self-govern. And everybody else is going to encourage you to self-govern because they're going to be self-governing themselves. And they don't want a lot of the stuff that I talk about that's unhealthy to do in your interactions. They don't want it in their life anymore. They see how it creates tremendous stress, Nigel, and they don't want it anymore. They want to have people that are honest, straightforward, respectfully communicate, have a commitment to the organization they're a part of, enjoy coming to work. I know there are tons of people sitting out there that'll listen to this podcast that dread going to work at all. And it's because of the environments. I've had conversations with CEOs and owners of businesses, and everything, there is no appreciation of the human elements in their organization. They have a replacement process going on of people all over the world. So if this person isn't doing their job, they just take them out and put somebody else in. That kind of world, I cannot support. I want us to be able to show people, okay, this is how you're blocking your change. This is how when you cut somebody down with sarcasm and you think it's funny, you think you gain power by that, but then you cut off a complete interaction with another human being. That's the reason I'm having trouble with discussions with some people that have a different political view from mine because it's labeling, sarcasm, and cutting down rather than looking at resources, looking at what the possibilities are about the subject we're even talking about. And so that's the reason that I do the work I do as an organizational development consultant. I want to make a change, and I've done it in 3, and I want to do it more often. Because I honestly, Nigel, I meet too many people. I don't know what level, whatever level they're at. They do not know what they're doing that's not helpful, so they are not self-governing.
We're in a time and place where we got pop psychology, we got self-help books, we got self-proclaimed experts. I think that there's a bit of a dependence on that for some people, right? You read the self-help book, 7 steps to whatever. I'm not sure that that's helpful. That's one perspective in one set of circumstances. But I take your point. Uh, Business has become unpleasant. And frankly, that's a thing that's kept me entirely from getting any interest going back into a corporate world. Not to name names or cast aspersions, but I've been in places where the management style is just not, it's not healthy. And I've
Right.
also been in a couple of companies where there's been a lot of friction, what seems to be tension and a real lack of organization, but frankly, it's people self-governing better. And it takes a particular sort of individual to fit in there. And I've been shown up in that place and fought it and realized after a while, no, my goodness, this is a healthy place to be, right?
Right.
It's people believing in a mission, but different personalities. But if you got a place where you just replace people who aren't performing, I don't like that. My mission has always been to try and build within an enterprise. If I got a group of people yes, I've had to let them go, but I can't just do it callously. I like to take them aside. I like to coach them. I'd like to mentor them. I think, last podcast, I've got some good friendships that have resulted from my mentoring people. They've
Right.
respected it, and it's made them better and more successful. So having this cutthroat, replaceable business culture, that's not useful for us. And I don't know if this goes back to shareholders or what, but somewhere somebody's got to tell that it's a board level issue, I think, in many cases, right? Shareholder representation, not so much advocacy or activism, but the board's got to be self-aware. So somewhere, we've got to get business leaders more interested in being leaders and benefiting society, benefiting the people, and not just being robber barons. That's, another thing we don't disagree on, right? Uh,
Well, see, and I think people are going to find that when they sit down and they try to be reasonable and responsible, they're going to be stunned at how much they have in common, you know. And I just know something. I want to work in organizations that are willing to hear what I have to say and to see what the changes can be. Because I spend my life doing that. I am a coach, and I also do organizational development and training and all that, Nigel, which you well know. But I do it with my sponsees that I have in various programs that I support, that are young people that need some help. And I talk to them and teach them things just like I would in any of the organizations because I want them to be different. One of my favorite sayings that people really appreciate, as I say, it has nothing to do with your parents and how you grew up. It was really painful what you've been telling me. It's unacceptable what you experienced. So you didn't learn how to write a book, how to live life. Now, what we're going to do in this recovery program, or whatever else I'm, helping with younger people, I just say you're going to learn how to write your book differently. You're going to live differently, and their eyes light up. I have one now, and she's so excited that she has somebody that wants to help her write a book about how to live in a really constructive way that leads to some of the things she really wants to do.
Well,
She never-
you made an interesting point there, right? Which is you've got your past, but you can't blame that. You can't live in it and hold your future hostage as a consequence of your past. And
Amen.
but this is kind of one of the problems we've got, right? Which is people they've learned that it's acceptable, and in fact that it's uh, almost imperative that you find somebody to blame. And we do see this in politics, right? And then we've got government handouts, et cetera, et cetera. Now, again, we not trying to turn this into a political debate because that's not our intent. But if we don't have the self-awareness, if we can't accept our circumstances, if you can't do something about them, right? If you're not willing to, then I mean, it's one of our problems in society is we keep bailing out. How do we get that self-awareness and the self-sufficiency back? I mean, I am going to say this, right? As a voter, we've got an obligation to be a little more active at the local level
Right.
and present some thoughts and ideas to our politicians and participate in primaries, right? Make your voice heard. When I look at the candidates in primaries these days, I'm shocked because I'm just seeing this extremism and absolutism become more and more obvious. And why do we do that? I don't know, because we think that we're special and we've got a particular identity and that person is going to support us. And the frailty there, I believe, is we see the politicians get the votes, but then they're unable to act. Because guess what? We've got guide rails that are established by a constitution and a rule of law, and we have methods that we can stop some of this because we have a constitution to protect us from tyranny.
Well, my sadness is I see such pain in the people oftentimes that I work with. Their stories, there are loads of people out there in the world that have painful stories about how they grew up, what they learned, and what they're doing now that's not successful. So they all walk into any organization you and I work in, and we have to have some way to create the environment we work in that we develop those people. So we're not telling them what they have to do. We're giving them ideas, and that's what I do in the program Driving Culture Change and Building Authentic Relationships. That's what I do is I teach them a lot of stuff, and then it's their decision whether they're going to use any of it. But they have a chance to look and say, there was a young man, he was just out of high school and he was in his first job. And he came up to me and he said, "No wonder my friends are so pissed off at me. I'm doing more than half of those blocking techniques you listed the other day, Dr. Jackalyn." And I said, "Well, then maybe you can change them." He said, "I'm taking the list and we're going to talk about it in my group." And I thought, that's what I want to see. I want people to want to know what is the best way in the world to build a relationship and learn how to do things differently that are not helpful to me. Let me find out what I can do to be successful. And that's what I think we're talking about as well. And we're not talking about that now. We're talking about all the drama and all the other stuff. Now, I'm going to get us into a subject where we may have some difference of opinion because I'm watching the time here and some stuff. But I want to go to the one where we talk about borders and agreeing we need sovereignty. Sovereignty. I have a hard time with that, Nigel, so you can pronounce it correctly. But I'd like to talk about sovereignty and talk about what you and I see is maybe different points of view, or we have common things. And we haven't had this discussion, as I recall. Okay?
Yeah, I think this is a good one. So first off, I'm an immigrant. I've been now in, well, since 2000, so 26 years. I started off with L1 visas, uh, got permanent resident status, and then moved to citizenship as fast as I could do any of those steps, right? So where I'm going there saying is I'm a legal immigrant. I followed the system, followed the processes, paid the fees when necessary, and was ready to prove my worth through the citizenship test where somebody may have asked me about the Constitution or something. And I think, I believe I've added value to this country, right? It's kind enough to accept me. They let me in. They're quite respectful to me at the border. My other passports, they're not quite so welcoming for some reason, right? But look, I think immigration, my wife is a legal immigrant too, right? She moved here same time I did, worked in the energy industry, so very much the same background history. I've got plenty of associates who are legal immigrants from any number of other places. The point is that we're adding value. We have been of benefit to society. We've helped the economic prosperity. We've helped enterprises, companies rather grow. We've benefited this country on the global stage, I think. We've done the things that I believe contribute to what we've discussed as national security, right? And for me, taking that jump to citizenship means I'm keenly interested in all of those issues around national security, right? It's not just a convenience that I live here with the expectation of going back someplace. But I do think there's a distinction between open borders and a functional economic policy. Now, we can talk about people who are undocumented. What do you do with them? That's going to be a long, probably some heavy lifting conversation. But no country survives without welcoming immigrants. Com-
Amen.
Countries grow companies benefit as a consequence of being able to move people around, whether it's temporary or on a permanent basis, right? So I don't think you can say, well, let's stop all immigration. But I do think you need to know, for the sake of national security, who's in your country and why they are. And our liberty is not to be lost due to surveillance and oversight. But our liberty and our freedoms exist often because, one, we choose to follow the guidelines, follow the societal rules, and we would expect others to. And people that don't should have no right to be here. So I am going to say this, that immigration is good. What we need and what we don't have, it seems, and haven't for a long time, is a working immigration policy. And opening the borders is not an answer, and closing the border airtight is not an answer. But I think that we've got, as a country, we've got immigration laws. There's nothing really wrong with them, but we need to use them. We need to follow them. We need to enforce them. And that's part of the rule of law, right? Any administration that just chooses to ignore federal law, well, I mean, there's a problem. Again, I don't care what color shirt they're wearing. But immigration is a problem for us. If we don't allow immigration, then we're going to end up as a fundamentally ignorant nation. And the very things we're trying to protect on national security are going to become more difficult to protect. We want the exchange of ideas, but I will say, and I can't remember, it may have been Roosevelt, but if you come to America, be American. And that means, I think, you take on a burden when you come here, which is, there's a way of life, there's a society, there's a bit of a structure we have. And if you show up and you want to deconstruct it, well, then you're going to have a problem from people like me, right? Because as an immigrant, I probably put more value in my passport than people who were born here. And I find this strange, right? I'm more interested in society and the Constitution and political processes than a lot of people who were born and raised here, who've, as you said earlier, I've just chosen to be ignorant. I mean, I like this place. I want to see it survive. I want to be part of its growth and survival. So immigration's good. Uncontrolled, that's a problem.
Yeah, and let me say that I don't want uncontrolled immigration. I don't want that. There are some things that I find very disturbing because I have spent my life growing up in Texas, and I have known many, many people from a different race than mine. And what I've seen them do is they may have had to swim over uh, the river in order to get over here because they didn't have the connections with an oil company or do something else so they could come in. But when they came, they were so grateful to be here. They've been here for 20 or 30 years, and they pay their taxes, they go to church, they raise their kids, they make certain the schools that their kids go to know that they're supportive of them. They are the best thing that has happened, and they provide the services that a lot of people do not want to do, you know. And there are other things. I watched the disrespect for science itself. I lived 8 blocks in Houston from the medical center for 34 years. I have seen some of the most phenomenal things because I have worked with people that have serious illnesses. So I have seen what MD Anderson did. I've seen what Methodist did with hearts. I've seen all the things, but most of those doctors, they come from other countries and they bring a richness like you were talking about and a commitment that you had. Now, there's one thing that I've got to find the podcast I did because I have it. There was a young man from South America that worked with either the Washington Post or the New York Times and talked about what Biden and Kamala Harris were doing in South America to help the economic changes in the various countries so that they could discourage illegal immigration and encourage more immigration that came forth with guidelines and that we followed through with it. Now I'm going to find that because I can't find it, but I'm going to find which one I did because it's an amazing thing. And what I'll do is try to find it this evening so I can put it in as a resource. But this young man said something, and he was right. He said, because Kamala Harris, the Democratic Party, and Biden have not emphasized what they did in South America in the last 9 to 10 months and how it has helped to manage some of the immigration problem, they will lose because they have not told the story. And I think that's what happened.
Well, there's
Now,
optics, there's communication, but at a basic level, we still had this surge of undocumented people who are frankly not going to add a lot of value to our society, not going to really contribute economically. And I'm talking about the last few years, right? And I agree, there's been efforts now for many administrations, right, to try and improve the quality of life, the state of the economy, and everything from trying to overturn despot rulers,
right.
uh, technology transfers, et cetera, getting educational standards leveled up so that the doctors and the lawyers and engineers from second and third world can come here and add value, right? And look, I welcome that skill that's coming in, that diversity, that culture, the richness, if you will, the value that they add, because it's going to make everybody's life better. There's no question about that. But I will say the fact that we have, and our census is driven by a lot of people who aren't here legally. I don't have a lot of sympathy for them. And I will say at a very fundamental level, I have no sympathy for people who are here and wish to do us ill. They should be found and they should be sent home. And that goes to our national security, right? And I think it goes to we want to know who's voting and why and how. Um, and there's probably some friction that we're going to find there, but if we have functional economy, and we're not just seen as a refuge for anybody, excuse me, a functional immigration policy, then it benefits us and it strengthens us. If we don't have the culture and the other way of solving problems that immigrants tend to bring, that sounds like an overly simplification, right? It almost sounds like, but they've got an upbringing. Their educational system has been different. They're educated at the same standards, but I'm going to say they understand problems in a different way. Now, that benefits us because we don't want a sterile immigration system. We don't want a sterile educational system. We want our universities and colleges to have a little more diversity. And I think it's not unreasonable to say we'd like to see more of our politicians have a different point of view as well, right? And that to me, we will benefit from a good immigration policy. But I will say again, if we have people here who want to subvert the U.S., don't want to live by the rule of law, can't follow the elements of the Constitution, I don't want them here. I think they pose an existential threat to us and our society.
I can't, I don't want people here that have a reason to be here to simply gain some kind of financial base at the expense of other human beings. Uh, I'm talking about human trafficking. I'm talking about drugs and alcohol. I'm talking about all those things that have been a part of our country. Where I would say that I don't think we're different. I just think that I have a perspective that if a person comes here, whether they're undocumented or not, let's try if they are willing to contribute to our society, if they are willing to pay their taxes, if they are willing to help their communities and live their life in a productive way, then let's find a way to document them and support them in supporting our communities. And that's what I want. I want some kind of immigration policy that includes the possibility of literally educating, encouraging, and not threatening to send them home, rather inviting them since they are already contributing. And I I think there are ways that that could be done. And I know something. We're going to have to talk more in the next one we do about national security because we've got a lot of other topics to talk about, and we're running out of time. But, I want to have secure borders. But I'll tell you one thing, I do not lack, I lived in Del Rio. I do not like the idea that the Guadalupe has horrific buried kinds of things that, fencing and all that, that could truly harm someone, kill them, and so forth. I do not think that is the kind of humanity that I want to live in. I don't want to build walls. I want us to find a way to establish relationships that can be so positive that we can come to some agreement and have people come in. I don't want just white people coming in here
No,
because
no,
they
no.
might vote for somebody. I want a diversity that comes in, and I would like to find a way to really also support those individuals because there are a lot of them that are living every day. They couldn't possibly do it with this administration, but there's got to come a day where we say, here's what's available to help you to become a citizen of the United States. Here's what we can do. Because I think there are many resources that we have that we ignore because we don't realize how important they are to us.
I don't disagree with that, but I think the reality of our world today, our existence, and the fact that um, there's an abundance of people who are not going to follow a law or policy that obligates us to put in physical barriers. And I don't know if there's a first principle process, but I will say you have to know who's coming into the country. So there can't be anybody who's undocumented. You can't just show up and walk into the country. There's no other place where you can do that. And I don't think that there's anything fundamentally wrong with the US having a policy that almost every other country on the face of the earth has, which is our borders are not open. We'll take immigrants, but we have to have immigrants that are going to benefit us as society. And we can't have people who are here and have no record, no understanding of who is here. That's brought us to the child trafficking, the drug problem, a handful of things, right? And they're destructive to our society. So you can't just lock up the border, but you can't do
I,
the opposite.
and I support I know what you're saying. The fine line between you and me is I want to help the undocumented people that I know. I want them to have the flexibility and freedom and not the fear of walking around every day. I would like for them to have programs and educational processes because I see them living the principles that I live. They live the value structure that I live around family and around many other things that I see that respect and understanding and love and caring for each other. So I'm not going to eliminate undocumented people because I know the ones that represent the kind of values that I have. And I want to find a way where we resolve that issue and then we also define how we're going to bring people in. And Nigel, I'm going to find the one that this young man did because I think you would appreciate. And I'm going to find that podcast because I did it. I literally used this young person's video because I think it came out of New York, but he is from South America, and he was able to come to this country. But here's what I would like. I think we have many more things we can talk about national security. You've got the list. You see where we are on it. So I'm asking you, can we continue this discussion and keep going? Because I think national security is something people have lost the sense that we have national security. They're walking around with all this drama and lies and insanity, and they don't understand we are a nationally secure nation. We just need to improve how we contribute to that. Now it's your turn,
Yeah, it
but
merits
that's
a lot more conversation. I think we've tried to define it. We haven't. I don't think we've got the right context around some of the definition parts, but um, to me, it's an absolute fundamental. It's maybe the biggest single thing that we're facing because if uh, if you look at how, again, when we base our conversation around the description that we've offered, self-governance, et cetera, the protection of the economy, yada, yada. Without that, then almost everything else, education, healthcare, you name it, ceases to have any relevance. So I think it's
amen.
appropriate to think about the central issue of national security, help people get an idea of what it means. Because again, it's far different than it was 45 years ago. It's different than it was 10 years ago. And I'm sure in 20 years it will be different further. But if we don't get it current, get the right context, then it's hard to have conversations around it. So it's appropriate to think about, again, if we agree on our definition, and you and I do, let's think about the issues around it, right? When we think about self-governance, what does it mean? When we think about educational empowerment, what does it mean? And that's, I think, where you get to some of the core issues that do become political in their basis, but not so much a political argument, right? I think we started off with this of how do you have a conversation? Well, that turned into the self-awareness, that turned into do your research. And if you do the research, if you've got the capacity to do some research, and I think that comes from an educational system, et cetera, then probably we could be a little more effective again in directing our politicians to fight for something that's actually important to us, right?
Right
And
on.
maybe that's where we're trying to get to. I don't know if it's a restoration of the more, mid 60s through 70s, because at that point there was far less difference from one party to another. And I think there's a greater cohesion around what was important to us because we had the Cold War, we had Cuba, we had all these crises, if you will, that served to unite us. And instead now, well, we're just manufacturing a crisis for some reason. It lasts for the new cycle. By Thursday afternoon, it's already gone. So let's um let's keep talking about national security.
Well, and I think I want to give our readers a chance to know something. There's a lot of stuff with election security. There's cybersecurity. There's energy and renewables, and what are we going to do to support our country? There's climate change. I could name multiplicity of things, and I think we have those prepared. And I think, we haven't discussed them, but we have some ideas, and I think it would be beneficial. And so what I'm going to say is, I think this this stands alone as what we've talked about, but it's like part one, and we have some more parts to cover. Um, how would you like to? Is there what kind of things would you like to say to the listeners today? And I'm going to do the same. about what we've talked about, or anything you want to say?
Yeah, very briefly. I think that we've begun to define some issues, and what we're seeing is a difference of interpretation of some things, and that's good, right? Because that allows the conversation. What what I think we've done as well, though, it's more leveling. It's finding out, well, there's not a lot of difference when it comes to things that are important to us, right? We're talking about our own health and well-being. We're talking about the health and well-being of our neighbors. And we're talking about the health and well-being of the cities we live in, of our communities, right? We don't want to see them fail. And having some animus towards a different person or personality or whatever, and wishing for failure, that's not useful. And I
Amen.
feel that we've
Amen.
agreed that those aren't the conversations we're having. But, you know, if we look again at national security and begin to break down some of these things, we'll find places where we should say more or less government intervention. Who should be making this decision, that decision? And
Righto.
I would I would suggest those are good conversations to have, because that's when you get down to fundamental operative differences, um, and that steers us clear of the outrage.
Thank you. And I think that's the reason that I wanted to do this with you. Because I want to have conversations like this. See, somebody else could have had a major argument about the slight difference you and I have about immigration and what we'd like to see. There could be a blow up. That's pointless. I just want us to find my difference. My thing is I want us to find the undocumented people that are in our country that are contributing to our nation, and I want us to find a way to allow them to be citizens of the United States. And I want us to have a really effective immigration policy. You may have, as you've described, some of your views of it. But see, if we work together, maybe we could get what we need for an immigration policy. So I am very appreciative of our friendship. Uh, I always learn something. When I read the initial program that you sent me, and then I started working on it with my, you know, I started learning immediately. I was sitting at lunch with Liz, and I said, it's phenomenal what I learned by doing this kind of program with my friend Nigel. So I have done a lot of reading and a lot of thought in the last 2 days about national security. Thank you. I want to say to the listeners, I really appreciate you listening to our program. We're going to continue this because we believe people can have a discussion and build meaningful relationships. Thank you.
Until September.
You bet.